Welcome to the September 2023 news edition for Conveyancing Matters. Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property. So, Stu, hello, how are you?
Hello. How are you, Lorraine? I'm okay. You good?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. So
Good
we're
stuff.
already on the September 2023 news edition for Conveyancing Matters. Not quite sure where this year's going, Stu. And well, we're not too far away now from Wednesday, the 8th of November, are we? So what's happening on the 8th of November, Stu?
So obviously we're back in London with one of our conveyancing live shows at the Hoxton 7. We've got a few things lined up, haven't we, to chat about?
Yeah, absolutely. It's 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. For those of you who don't know, CPD and networking in a great venue. And a couple of drinks. Well, we're going to be talking about conveyancing disasters, aren't we, Stu? What goes wrong with conveyancing and how we can perhaps put those things right. So we'd really love to hear, people's war stories beforehand. So if anybody watching this got any sort of particular conveyancing disasters they'd like to share with us, we'd be really happy to talk about them on the night. Very straightforwardly, it's £10 a ticket. We'll put details on social media of how you can get one. But of course, if someone's an individual subscriber, Stu, they can come for free.
Absolutely free. That's right.
Absolutely. So they can, for £40 a year, they can get a webinar a month for CPD, together with lots of other content, plus access to the CM lives, and firm subscribers for £150 a year can get access to the webinars and the content, and send three people to the event. So it would be lovely to see people. So that's the selfless promotion, Stu, for Conveyancing Matters Live on the 8th of November. So what's the first thing that one of the first things perhaps that's hit you this month?
So for me, the big thing that's come up in the last month or so has got to be undertakings. And we're going to sort of discuss undertakings soon, aren't we, on one of our webinars?
It's already up.
Already up.
Yeah, already up and done with that organised. Oh, wow. Yeah, absolutely. So what caught your eye on the undertakings front, Stu? Why have we done a CPD webinar for our subscribers on undertakings?
It's just, for me, the industry, I think, is a bit blasé over the subject. And, we're not really maybe considering the merit of an undertaking, whether we should be giving them in the first place.
Yeah, so the CLC mentioned in their 2023 risk review, didn't they, Stu, about undertakings? And you made an interesting observation, which is what's prompted us to do the exclusive CPD webinar for our subscribers, specifically on undertakings, as you say, because the CLC report, don't they, Stu, that they're getting more breach of undertakings reported to them? Yeah,
definitely. I think, it's a really interesting one, this, isn't it? Because, without undertakings, the transaction can't really take place. It's absolutely fundamental to a conveyancing transaction going from A to B, and therefore, for the CLC to release the information they did is a bit concerning that, there is this volume that potentially are being breached. But I think in turn also, from what I see on a day-to-day level, firms are reporting breaches when there hasn't been a breach. And we discussed recently sort of qualified undertakings. And I think it's really important. It's not just reviewing the undertaking that you may be giving, but it's also the one that you're receiving.
Yeah, absolutely. So for anyone that's interested, do subscribe, because we talk about undertakings in detail in that webinar.
I think we thought it was going to be a fairly short one, didn't we? But it ended up being sort of well over an hour. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, plenty of meat on the bones.
I think so. Well, of course, we can't, Stu, can we, do an update? I think without the Building Safety Act moving its head. And there have been a sort of couple of updates to the regulations this month. We reported on the new landlord certificate last month. But the one thing I wanted to mention, which a magazine called Inside Housing reported, which I just thought was just very interesting, is as we know, one of the big sort of bugbears and risks for conveyancers is establishing whether or not a leasehold property is in a relevant building, and under the Building Safety Act, a relevant building must meet all of the following criteria. So as we know, it's got to be at least 11 metres or 5 stories, whichever is reached first. It's got to contain at least 2 dwellings, and it must not be a leaseholder-owned building. And there's a lot of government guidance on how to measure the height of a building, and that was actually sort of repeated in the Conveyancing Association booklet on the Act. And I think when we did our webinars, our subscriber webinars on this, I mean, we were very clear, Stu, weren't we, that, you know, conveyancers are many things, but surveyors we are not, and really, we shouldn't be anywhere near dealing with the height of buildings. I mean, what's your view? How are you handling that in practice?
Well, this is the whole thing, isn't it? It's what we're sort of being asked to comment on. We simply can't. That is the whole point of the problem, isn't it? We can't be drawn to giving an opinion on something that we can't.
Exactly. And therefore, what I just thought was an interesting aside, really, as I say, inside housing, and they've got a whole article on it. I'm just going to quote a line from it. But so the Guinness Partnership is a sort of very, very big, sort of institutional landlord, own all, buildings all over the shop. And inside housing report that, and I quote from them, the Guinness Partnership has apologised to flat owners after its own advisors incorrectly identified her building as falling outside the leaseholder protections in the Building Safety Act 2022. So the nub of it was the Guinness Partnership, a multi-million-pound owner of many apartment blocks, didn't get the height of one of their own buildings right. And my only observation on that, Stu, is well, if they can't, if the owner of the building can't get it right, then
how can we?
Exactly.
And why would you make comment on that anyway? Why would you put yourself in that position?
Exactly. So if firms haven't scoped their retainer to absolutely exclude any commentary really on the height of the building, then frankly they should be doing that. But I just thought that was very interesting. I mean, to be fair and to give them their due, the Guinness Partnership apologized and fair play to them, but they made the mistake for quite a long time. And I just think the context is all, and I think in the context of what conveyancers are dealing with, I just thought that was quite a salutary tale. But on the subject of a Building Safety Act, Stu, what do you want to go on to comment on?
Well, we were talking earlier, weren't we? QBE, the insurance company, offers PI cover. They've recently issued some briefing notes for conveyancing on the Building Safety Act, on maybe what we would sort of consider a very practical level. So where we've sort of spoken before about the intricacies of the Act and how complicated it is, I think these notes are quite prevalent and important insofar as they deal maybe with potentially what could come up next year on renewals, that kind of thing. And I think actually getting to know what you've been working on historically, and what you're going to be doing, making sure you've got a list or register of what you've transacted on, and doing things such as reviewing your retainer with clients and all the existing precedents that you've got, that you're sending to clients. And do you even now need a completely separate report that goes to your client, purely on the Building Safety Act? I don't know. But I think it just brings it all into sharp context, in terms of, what we need to do. We talk so much about the Act and the ins and outs of it all, but from a practical level, actually looking at what we're transacting on, making sure we've got those registers so we know our beans, kind of thing. Because I'm sure as the years go on, there are going to be claims, and knowing what you may have done before it all hit the fan and after, and so on and so forth, is going to be very, very important.
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, if conveyancers want to go and find it, as I say, it's the insurer QBE, as you say. Google it, you'll find it. I just thought think it's interesting that an indemnity insurer, is prepared to stick a briefing note out there. It's a few months old now, but I just think there's, as you say, Stu, there's a lot in it it's quite a good overview. They're not purporting to give advice, but the sort of list of sort of things that conveyancers can be doing, it is all to the good. And I'm afraid I'm going to say it, but you know, our regulators are still suspiciously quiet about all this stuff. You know, everybody's dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, and you know, the Law Society and the CLC, to be frank, haven't put out any sort of detailed support for conveyancers. The Law Society have said, well, we're lobbying, but that's not helping people on a day-to-day basis. So to be completely fair to organisations like QBE, like the Conveyancing Association, organisations that are at least putting usable content out there, you know, I think have got to be applauded, really. Because you know, there are many organisations, I think, that should be supporting us that are suspiciously silent.
Definitely, 100%.
So, Stu, I just wanted to mention in passing, really, because it sort of confirms what we already knew. But I always think when the Supreme Court says anything, you know, we should listen, really. And conveyancers, just from a sort of pure sort of banking and sort of cybercrime risk point of view, might be just interested to know that the Supreme Court has spoken on a case involving push payment fraud. FIPS is the case, in case anybody wants to go and look at it. Very, you know, very recent. Don't want to say a lot about it, but just to explain, the claimant actually fell victim to a push payment fraud and sent sort of 700 grand to a fraudster's account in the United Arab Emirates, and essentially tried to make a claim against her bank, and basically tried to sort of claim that the bank was responsible for the loss. The claimant contended that the bank owed her a duty under its contract with her or at common law not to carry out her payment instructions if, as was alleged, the bank had reasonable grounds for believing she was defrauded. Now, I'm always interested in cases where, you know, a subsequent court overturns the earlier one, and the High Court gave judgment in favour of the bank. The Court of Appeal overturned it, and interestingly, the Supreme Court overturned the Court of Appeal, and they held that the bank didn't owe the alleged duty to the claimant, which I think, you know, in the circumstances and on the facts, was invariably right. But I thought what was interesting is some of the comments made by the Supreme Court, which is, you know, should be ringing in the ears of conveyancers in terms of, you know, fraud and authorizing TT payments or whatever, because the banks, the Supreme Court said, you know, the Court of Appeal was wrong to reach this conclusion, which is inconsistent with the first principles of banking law. It is a basic duty of a bank under its contract with a customer who has a current account in credit to make payments from the account in compliance with the customer's instructions. This duty is strict where the customer has authorized and instructed the bank to make a payment. The bank must carry out the instruction promptly. It is not for the bank to concern itself with the wisdom or risks of its customers' payment decisions. And the court went on to say, you know, push payment fraud, as they described it, a growing social problem, undoubtedly can cause great hardship. They referred to the sad facts of the case. But basically, the court said, you know, whether who should bear the loss, whether it should be the victims or the banks, isn't something for the courts to decide. You know, that's a matter for policy and for Parliament to consider. But I just thought it was really a very sort of strong sort of reminder, really, of you know, the risks around push payment fraud and the fact that, you know, if we authorize money to go somewhere, you know, the sender is likely to be picking up the tab, which I think is very relevant for firms as well as individuals.
Yeah, 100%. I still think maybe cyber fraud's gone under the radar a bit the last sort of 6 months to a year, probably because the Building Safety Act has literally muscled its way in and taken over everything, hasn't it? But we still in the office regularly see sort of bank details emailed to us, and I still, you know, some practitioners are very what's the right words, you know, flabbergasted that we're ringing up to check bank details and stuff like that. I still think there's a bit of a maybe a proportion of the profession is still turning a bit of a blind eye to it,
or just becoming complacent. I mean, you say that, Yeah, I mean, you saying that, Stu, I think, let's announce it here, because I've just decided, you saying that, let's do a CPD on, on some of the issues around cyber fraud, because you're right. My concern about it has always been, and the way I've always described it is, it becomes like the wallpaper. You sit in a room for so long and you look at the wallpaper every day, and if someone said describe the wallpaper, you couldn't, because it's just in your face all day, so it just becomes like background. And I've got absolutely the same theory about cybercrime and cyber fraud. Property lawyers are hearing about it all the time, and therefore it sort of becomes white noise. So
it's not just within our industry either. It's not just within our industry, is it? So I think everybody does hear about it, and maybe they're not putting it into context in terms of how it affects us. But you've always got to just bear in mind that every single client that we act for could be, prey, and of course ourselves. So it's just something that affects us all the time. But I'm still amazed. Literally yesterday, I had two sets of lawyers email me bank details. And one particularly had the right hump that would actually rung to check them. So you've really got to be careful. But
I think I think it's just an interesting reassertion by the Supreme Court, and I think let's do a CPD webinar on it, because I think you're absolutely right. Under the radar is exactly the right phrase. So let's sort of drag that back to the fore, I think, Stu. Absolutely. So kind of moving on, Stu, what caught your eye next?
The other thing I thought might be worth having a quick discussion about is the Land Registry's Practice Guide 19 regarding restriction consents. Basically, we all know what a pain the Land Registry are in terms of the delays, and we all know what a pain getting restriction consent can be. It's one of those things, isn't it? It's always having to chase it. But they've recently said that they will not accept those certificates that are generically signed or PP'd, so they have to be signed by an individual. And I think although it may seem like a really minor point, when you've been waiting all that time, and then all of a sudden the requisition's raised, if you've gone to the effort to get the consent in the first place, to then have a requisition raised with the Land Registry not accepting it, is a real bummer. So it's a really important point to make. It may seem small, but actually double checking.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the Land Registry, the Land Registry have got sort of over 80 practice guides, running to hundreds of thousands of words and lines and what have you, and you get sort of a one-liner in Practice Guide 19, which is the one on notices and restrictions, which of itself is an absolute beast, I might say. Very useful, but I've never read it all at once because I just can't cope with it. But the Land Reg won't accept restriction consents and certificates PP'd. So PP Blogs and Co, or PP Blogs and Co Conveyancers, or PP Blogs and Co Management Company. They're going to reject it. It's got to be you don't really see that much these days, people PPing, do you? It's more electronically signed with just a simply printed name. I think they'll only accept electronic certificates and consents electronically signed by conveyancers, but it's still got to be a named individual. And I think the point,
that's the key, isn't it? It's the named individual.
And I think if we're dealing with management companies, and I know this is challenging, by the way, but we need to be trying to really get the form of restriction consent agreed before exchange, so we know what we're going to get when we're acting for the buyer. And I would suggest this goes a step further, because we need to know who is signing it on behalf of the organisation, who is going to sign it. And I think that's a really relevant point, because as you said, Stu, if we get one and we bang it off for our registration and it takes the registry months to give us a requisition, well, that could be, and the restriction does what it says on the tin. It means, you're not going to get your registration registered until that restriction is complied with. So, watch out for that. And obviously the risk of restrictions in a broader sense is, is always, always got to be at the top of conveyancers' minds. Because it's your point. It's the point you always make, Stu. We have all this other stuff to deal with, blooming building regs and bloody fencer and electrical certificates and things that we know nothing about. And yet our central job is to just get that title registered. That's our central job.
I was about to say, do you actually think maybe as a profession, we can be a bit blasé on restrictions in
Yes.
management companies, because
Yes.
the whole point of it is it's a restriction. The severity of it is quite high, isn't it? You know, if it goes wrong, you're not going to get something registered. So I do wonder now whether, because they're, what's the right way of putting it? You know, obviously there's a lot of title that contain these kind of generic restrictions in favour of management companies. Half the management companies are only using it as an angle to get another couple of quid off you. But I do think maybe we are a bit blasé over them.
Oh, I've come across firms, Stu,
I mean, would you say most firms would look at the, you know, consent to restriction before exchange?
well, they should be doing.
Oh,
I mean,
tiny,
what I
I would
find
say
is,
tiny percentage.
you know, the problem is firms treat restrictions as a bit of post-completion admin.
Yes.
That's the problem with it.
Yeah.
And so if you've got a firm where you've got a sort of silo effect, so everybody does their bit, the fee earner, or whatever they want to call themselves, will not really consider the restriction. They will just pass that to the post-completion team, who will then be expected to contact the management company for the restriction consent or certificate. And that's the problem. And, you know, the reality is that you actually need to know before exchange that you can comply with the restriction.
I think the reality is we can't moan, can we, about all the external things that we're thrust upon to deal with if we're not actually looking at the title. That is the fundamental part of conveyancing, isn't it? Checking the title. And of course, if there's a restriction on it, bang.
Absolutely. So, Stu, I just thought I'd move on just a tiny point, but it might, you know, interest in maybe employers to some degree. A slightly sort of tangential to property, but ACAS actually has just sort of reissued and updated its COVID guidance. Actually, on the 25th of August, they have sort of brought, you know, the government guidance together. And I suppose as perhaps a new COVID variant circulates, you know, employers might just be interested to go and have a look at that. I don't really want to say much more about it, but you know, we can't discount the possibility that if COVID, God forbid, starts to sort of rear its head again, then, you know, conveyancers are going to be on the front line again. And for those people who weren't, you know, who were watching this, who weren't involved with the misery of the COVID lockdowns and so on last time, you know, if people start getting ill, or, you know, if there are slight moves, you know, by government to as I say, to perhaps restrict movement, if, you know, if people have COVID, then that impacts massively on the conveyancing transaction. And of course, basically the solution that most conveyancers found was just during the COVID period to do simultaneous exchanges and completions. And of course, I'm not suggesting for a nanosecond we're going to go back to that point, but I do think, you know, conveyancers should just be sort of brushing off their advice and understanding around, you know, the risks of simultaneous exchanges and completions. I think, again, there's something that just sort of bandied about in, you know, that everybody seems to think is a marvelous idea without understanding actually any of the risks that go with it. And at the end of the day, it's the point you always make, Stu, you know, well, your client needs to understand the risks and to give you the authority to do it.
That's it.
So anyway, so hopefully, you know, nothing dramatic regarding COVID, but I say employers in particular might want to look at the guidance just to be, you know, staying ahead of the curve. So U-turns galore, Stu, by the government. So what else have you got on the list?
I thought we'd maybe mention EPCs, and the government proposed that only properties with a rating of A, B, and C can be rented out. I think that's from 2025.
Well, it was going to be, wasn't it? Newly rented properties from 2025.
2028, I think, yeah.
But that all went down the toilet last week, didn't it?
Certainly did, yeah. So I think they announced it on the 20th of September 2023. So they're going to scrap it. So
yeah, the Prime Minister came out and said, you know, plans regarding energy efficiency, and I quote, will be scrapped. So
again, I don't understand
no detail.
No, I mean, have EPCs really made much difference? I'm not sure really the impact on the market, and you know,
well, landlords bodies are reporting that the landlords that have decided to stay in the market have already allegedly been sort of improving the EPC rating of their properties, sort of in anticipation of these changes coming in 2025 and 2028. Others have said, well, it's great that it's being scrapped because the potential cost to bring properties up to an EPC rating of A, B or C would have been prohibitive and push landlords out of the market anyway. I think the problem, just for property lawyers as ever, is just the sort of lack of detail and therefore sort of knowing what to advise or what not. So again, it's of interest to particularly to property lawyers that act for clients that buy to let properties. You would have been saying to your buy to let clients, well, you know, if your rental doesn't have an EPC of A, B or C from 2025, you know, or if a new rental wasn't going to have an EPC rating of A, B or C from 2025, then it needs to have an existing tenancies that's going to, you know, going to apply from 2028. And now that advice appears to have gone down the tubes, but we haven't really got anything concrete to hang the advice on. And I think that's the problem for us as conveyancers and advisors, is that, you know, allegedly, you know, this will be scrapped, but we don't really know. We've got no detail. We don't know what
I think it's important as a generalization that you you know, in your standard reports to clients that you mention the EPC.
Yeah.
We're now obviously in receipt of the EPC, and therefore we have that knowledge that we then have to pass on to the clients. I think it's really important that you do have a standard paragraph that actually distances yourself from, you know, giving in-depth advice on the EPC.
Absolutely.
You do need something in there. I think maybe historically, again, it was something that we received and almost ignored. But you know, with you know, they've been around so long now that, you know, again, we do have to distance ourselves from, you know, giving advice on the energy efficiency of a property.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there are reports, aren't there, that you know, cost of living crisis, etc., is making more energy efficient homes more popular, or you know, buyers are perhaps more tuned into the energy efficiency of properties. I have to say, in my entire professional career, Stu, I've never had a client who said, I'm not purchasing that property because it's got a poor EPC rating.
I've never had a client even ask a question on EPC.
No. But, you know, so really, I suppose the watchword is, if you're acting for buy-to-let clients, you know, watch out for your report and just maybe amend that bit, and maybe a bit circumspect, and try not to advise fully because you can't, I suppose, is the point. And well, just a sort of couple of points I wanted to make. Well, and perhaps actually linking to the sort of buy-to-let advice, Stu, don't want to say any more than just pointing our conveyancer friends to the fact that the government has updated its how to rent guide, actually, well, from early October. So a how to rent guide, the government produces it. It's a checklist for renting in England, really quite a helpful thing, both for, you know, if you're a conveyancer acting on a buy-to-let matter, you should have a look at it, but actually to refer your clients to it. So just be aware, again, if you're acting on buy-to-lets, the how to rent guide has been updated. I absolutely do not think that conveyancers should be sort of getting heavily involved in you know, the intricacies of you know, rentals, private rentals more generally, if you don't advise on it, and certainly repossessions if you don't have a litigation team. You know, that side of leasehold work has become very, very specialist, actually, I think. But just to flag, really, that the how to rent guide is
limit your retainer, most definitely.
Absolutely. But it's of relevance if you're out for buy-to-let clients. And sort of, well, one of the last point I wanted to make, Stu, again, just to sort of arc back to last month, we mentioned, didn't we, the setting up of the Digital Property Market Steering Group, involving lots of organisations, you know, Land Registry, LC, Law Society, and frankly, lots of organisations that come together. They held their launch event, and well, I, you know, dare I say, profess to represent the conveyancing industry. They've come out and said, well, we're trying to digitize the process, and it's all jolly marvelous. And, you know, one has to applaud the effort, but I'm not sure that coalface conveyancers who are facing, you know, long land registry delays and, you know, longer transaction times than you and I were experiencing 20 years ago, Stu, are going to be too convinced, to be quite honest. I'm not saying, you know, but I'm not being a Luddite. I'm not saying we need to sort of not try to, you know, digitize and move forward. But I'm I'm still unconvinced, I have to say, that that's the that's the
I think you're
flagship
right.
point for
Yeah.
conveyancers at the coalface, is it really?
I think obviously we don't want to be critical of anybody that's trying to improve things, most certainly. But at this exact moment in time, it's, you know, on a day-to-day basis, one of the biggest things that affects us is simply the land registry's enormous delays, and therefore, you know, it seems a bit, maybe dare I say, hypocritical. The messages that are put out there,
Likely.
you know,
I have to say, and you know, and I think we've said before, I would be genuinely delighted to welcome Mike Harlow back on. He chatted to us very openly, I feel, in January. Not everybody took kindly to it, and frankly, I don't care. We're here to you know, talk to a lot of people about their views. We don't have to agree with everybody, but you know, I applaud anyone that's prepared to come on and talk to us. And I hope that we ask sort of decent questions, really, and don't dodge the difficult stuff. So, you know, be delighted if Mike wants to come back on, but I think you know, he'd have to understand, he'd have to field a few questions about the timeframes that the you know, the land reg are taking, Stu. But maybe to you know, what's your sort of final observation, Stu? Because it sort of you know, segues nicely into next week's guest.
Yeah, so it was really that the Department for Levelling Up and Communities has recently announced that the property logbooks will form part of their first home scheme, which is really interesting because, of course, one of our upcoming guests is Simon Lum from the National Deeds Deposit Agency. So I think they're going to be trialling 15 conveyancers. You know, it seems like a given, maybe, would I, you know, a no-brainer that, you know, upfront information, it all kind of leads into the same sort of thing. You know, having a collection of information at the onset can only be a good thing, can't it? So, you know, hopefully something can be, you know, I mean, I think it would need to become mandatory for it to be rolled out properly, but fingers crossed this is the start of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Simon's an interesting guest. He's going to be on next week. And as you say, he's sort of instrumental in setting up the Residential Logbook Association. And, you know, property logbooks, this idea that, you know, all of the salient information about a property is sort of essentially stored in a digital folder. And as a homeowner, sort of, you know, has a boiler upgrade or whatever, they sort of upload that information, the idea being that then when they move, all of that information is already there. And I think that sounds like a fantastic idea for conveyancers, quite frankly. So we're not faffing around sort of trying to sort out, well, as I said, you know, fencer certificates and all the stuff that has got nothing to do with the title to the property. But yeah, so as I say, Simon and his colleagues are sort of doing a sort of trial of logbooks with conveyancers, as in addition to and in parallel with, as you say, the government announcement. So you know, it'll be interesting to see what, for our viewers, to see what Simon's got to say. Well, that was more than we thought, I think, Stu. I think we've and I did wonder whether September was a bit thin on news, but I don't think so, to be quite frank.
Never going to be thin when the building safety acts on the
No.
around, is it?
There is
That's
that
the problem, isn't it? That is
well,
the
on
problem.
that bombshell, Stu, probably time for us to close this news chat. So I hope everyone's found it useful, and as we say, Conveyancing Matters live, Stu, 8th November, yeah. London, Hoxton 7, conveyancing disasters. So if anybody watching has got any particular, you know, disasters or war stories they'd like to share with us, we'd be really, you know, really grateful to hear those stories and perhaps share them on the night. And even better if you can come and join us.
That's it, definitely.
All right, Stu, you take care. See you soon.
Take care. See ya.
Bye.